support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm wrinkle reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now, almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed to depart from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top-secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it if such a thing is even possible? This is the nature of the nuclear era. And the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? This is the Thom Hartmann Book Club, the book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. Boy, what a wild weekend. It's like 100 degrees here in Portland. I mean, or yesterday, I think it's going to hit it again today. The whole country is like sweltering and has been. Well, it's summer, but it's also summer with a little added, what would you call it, global warming thrown in. Here you go. As John Lewis's body is being brought to Lyons State at the Capitol Rotunda, a huge honor. Patrick Leahy and 47 senators, or 46 others, have introduced a bill in his name, which I think is one of the best ways to memorialize somebody, called the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It would basically overturn the 2013 Shelby County v. Holder decision, in which John Roberts said there is no more racism in America, and therefore these southern states that have historically suppressed the black vote no longer have to be supervised by the federal government. Right. How did that work out? So, but, will Mitch McConnell take it up? Almost certainly not. For John Lewis's funeral, Donald Trump, instead of paying respects, apparently he's going to, by the way, John Lewis will be the first black lawmaker to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Apparently Trump is going to, the resident, is going to travel to North Carolina instead of the U.S. Capitol. There is so much going on. We've got a story of a Portland mom who got groped by these federal, I hesitate to even call them officers. I mean, this kind of goon squad that has seized control of a few square blocks of Portland. Now they're doing the same thing in Seattle. If you have been at any of these protests and have any stories that you would like to tell, feel free to give us a shout at 202-808-9925. But I think at the top of the list right now is that last week, the moratorium on evicting people because they haven't been able to pay their rent expired, and the $600 a week additional payment for unemployment expired. Now, it technically expires at the end of this week, the $600, but the reality is that the way that most states make their unemployment payments last week was, for the vast majority of Americans, well, really pretty much for everybody, was the last pay period or the last week in which they would get that $600. So now the Republicans in Congress are fighting with each other, and it's really interesting to watch. They're fighting with each other over how much they should cut your unemployment benefits if you're one of the 25 million people across the United States who are being basically kept alive by $600 a week in unemployment benefits. You've got some Republicans who are saying, well, we should cut it to zero. People shouldn't have any employment benefits. They should be so desperate, so frightened that they are willing to go into any old crappy workplace, even for $8 an hour, even if it means exposing themselves to the coronavirus and thus their family and their friends and their kids and their grandparents and their parents and et cetera. To hell with them. We're going to force them back to work. That's the line that's being taken by some of the Republicans, kind of the Rand Paul Republicans, the libertarian. I haven't heard those specific words out of the mouths of Rand Paul or Mike Lee, but I would be astonished if they were saying anything other than that, frankly. Then you've got other Republicans who are saying, well, we can throw them a bone. Let's give them $100 a week, or let's give them $200 a week. And then you've got other Republicans saying, no, it needs to be a formula. If this person, if the only job that they could find was paying $7.25 an hour, and their job has evaporated, then we should pay them 70% of $7.25 an hour. Right? We should cut their pay by 30%, or cut their income by 30%, rather, because that'll force them back to work. Won't that be nice? The problem with that is that, aside from the obvious, actually some of the European governments are offering 70 to 80% of your pay to stay home. But the Republicans are making people jump through hoops, and they're making it hard to get onto the websites and all this kind of stuff. But the big problem for that is that the Treasury Department says that if we've got to go in and calculate everybody's pay and then multiply that times 0.7 and then feed that money into the giant check printing machine, which also, of course, does electronic deposits, if we're going to do that, it's going to take months. We can't do math like that, overnight. That's why the Democrats put $600 a week into the original bailout, or the original whatever you want to call it, coronavirus compensation. And let's be very clear, by the way, we would not have this coronavirus crisis in the United States at anything close to the level that we have if Donald Trump had behaved with any and the Republican Party and Fox News and right-wing media had behaved with any level of competence or patriotism. Trump loves to say that the liberals who run the cities hate America. I got 3 emails from him this weekend that all said the same thing, in addition to the 2 I got from Don Jr. pitching his new book. He's got a new book about liberals out, or it's not out yet. And he says, if you make the first one said, make a $75 contribution and I'll send you an autographed copy. And then the second one said, make a $25 contribution and you'll be one of the very first to get my book. So now we've got this grifter's family using the RNC to raise money. And I'll get into that in just a minute. There's a mind-boggling story there too. But, it's like the question, I suppose, is how much worse must things get before Americans wake up to this whole Republican scam, this whole thing that they call being conservative. It's a scam. It's a hustle. It's a con. It's a con that's been going on since the late 19th century when they had the horses and sparrow theory. that the way that you create prosperity for average working people is you feed extra oats to the horses, which means that they will poop out lots of undigested oats, which means the sparrows who peck at the piles behind the horses will get fatter, right? They'll have and literally that's how it was sold in the 1880s and 1890s when this was first really rolled out in a big way. And then, it became basically trickle-down economics. During the Roaring '20s, it was like, if the rich people get really rich, then there will be benefit to society. What's good for General Motors is good for America. And then Reagan came along and coined trickle-down economics. But, the bottom line needs to be clear. Republicans were more than happy to pass out over $3 trillion over the last 3 years, $3 trillion between tax cuts and subsidies to giant corporations, billionaires, and people worth more than $100 million. But they don't give a rat's ass about you, me, or anybody who, qualifies as America's working people. They've been running this scam, the current version of this scam, since the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan tried to convince America that if we just destroyed unions, a third of America was unionized when he came into office. Now it's 6%. If we just destroyed the unions and cut taxes on rich people, prosperity will come to the working class. It was a lie then, and it's a lie now. And this weekend, all these Republicans were on the Sunday talk shows saying, well, people are more comfortable sitting at home and getting $600 than going back to work. They're making more money on unemployment than when they were working. Shouldn't that tell you something about what they were being paid when they were working? I mean, this is nuts. I mean, who wants to, no rational person, given the choice, would choose to expose themselves to a disease that could kill them or their family, or if they're lucky, only lead to lifelong kidney damage or heart damage or brain damage. But, ending the moratorium on evictions, letting the $600 expire, Republicans think that the risk of becoming homeless or not being able to pay for your medications or going hungry will get you back to work. Will it?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And then on top of that, they're like, oh, and gee, I wonder why there's an increase in crime. This is nuts. And welcome back. Whew. It's amazing. It's just amazing. Jude in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Jude, you were at the protests in Portland this weekend.
I was. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you. We spoke last Monday, and I ended up going down Tuesday again because I just felt the need to go down and be present to that. And there were about 1,000 people that day. And wherever I go, I travel with Boots and Flowers. I represent peace for many women around the country. So, but what I want to bring up is on Saturday night, there was an estimated 5,000 people that were present across from the Federal Building. And it's a slow evolution. When I got there, it's around 7 o'clock, and across the street there's the park, which still does not have any barriers. But it's filled with people, having barbecues, and you'd never know. I mean, the contrast looking at the Federal Building, which still has the barriers up and all the graffiti and such, is really quite mind-boggling. But as the evening progressed, this group, I wasn't present when the moms came in because the groups separated and part went down to the Marriott, where I am assuming that they believed that some of the federal agents or whoever they were staying there. And they proceeded to have this enormous chant around the Federal Building, around the Marriott Hotel. And afterwards, people started filtering out, and we went back towards the Justice Center, which is right next to the Federal Building. It was extraordinary, Tom. The amount of energy and focus and dedication of these people, I don't know how I can articulate into words what the nation really needs to do to support Portland right now. But as it began to progress, there they stood, this massive group of people, and drums began. And the drumming almost sounds like warrior drums, not challenging, but the presence, which I understand why Trump and all of them are probably really concerned about the consciousness of America, because people are awake. Well, it was probably a little after midnight, which was my intention to stay longer each time, and I'm down there by myself, but I had not one single sense of fear or trepidation about any of those people that I was around. I wove in and out of them, and I'm extremely short, so by the time we got back to the federal building, I was probably 10 layers of people standing right up on the sidewalk across from the federal building, because they were getting ready to just be present. And they started, a young fellow came up, and he said, you need to step back. He said, they're going to start dispersing. And he said, you're not prepared for it. So I moved back a little bit, and before I knew it, I don't know if it was pepper spray but there was an explosion of things going on. And that substance is so difficult. I couldn't quite catch my breath. And as I wove my way, all these people were walking. No one was fearful. No one was running. But I was surrounded by a group of probably individuals around 30 or so that had their normal saline bottles, to spray your eyes, and stood and talked with me and gave me water to flush my mouth out with. And Tom, the fellow takes off his goggles to give them to me. Wow. There's so much more than what's being revealed, and I have deep gratitude for those people down in Portland, and I'll be returning again, and hopefully I can stand in the front with boots and flowers to be present for the women and the veterans.
Jude, keep calling and giving us updates. Thank you so much. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. It's astonishing. Just think about this. This year alone, with this one source of revenue, according to Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, this year alone, we could fund tuition-free college for all, eliminate child hunger, ensure clean drinking water for every American household, build 500,000 affordable housing units, provide face masks for everybody, produce the protective gear and medical supplies our health workers need for the pandemic, and fully fund the U.S. Post Office. Now, what is this magical thing that we could do that would produce enough money to do all these things? Fund the Internal Revenue Service. Republicans have cut its funding so badly since 2010 that fully a third of their enforcement is no longer happening. And tax cheats have walked off, or they're basically refusing to pay over $260 billion in taxes this year. You can hear the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So Jennifer Christensen, and I'm not sure if I'm mispronouncing her name, but it's spelled sort of like that, is a 37-year-old mother and attorney here in Portland. She was part of the Wall of Moms. She has a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. And she talked with Heavy.com, which is one of these new news sites, progressive news site, in a video posted by Portland journalist Sergio Olmos. Essentially, her story, you can see her story playing out. An officer, she's about 5 feet tall. She said she was pushed by an officer who was around 6'2", and then she heard the woman right to her left, the woman standing next to her, scream and then say that the officer had just hit her breast with a club, beaten her in the breast. So Christensen said, this is from Heavy.com, Christensen said that she then used her arm that was free to put herself between the woman who just had her breast smashed, the cop was getting ready to hit her again, and the officer. I shouldn't call these guys cops. They're not cops. They're goons. She said if he swung again, she wanted it to be her arm that would be hit, not the other woman's breast. So they pulled her out of the line and arrested her. And they took her into the federal building, and she said this is what she told. She had bruises, all across her chest. She did. She had been hit also, and she said before we go in, this is going into the building. Before we go in, he pushes me up against the wall, facing the wall, and uses his left hand to cup my right breast, and his right hand to flip up my skirt and grab my right butt cheek. She said the thought went through her head, is this the day I get raped against the building? Christensen said, again, reading from this heavy article by Tom Cleary, Christensen said she was taken into the federal building, was not told her charges, was not told that she was under arrest. They never read her rights. She said that they handcuffed her behind her back and took her into an elevator. Inside the elevator, she was pushed into a corner by a federal officer. Christensen said there were 4 officers in the elevator with her. One told her to stop resisting, and she said back, I'm 100 pounds, I'm not resisting. And then he yelled, shut up at her. And it goes on from there. I mean, you can read the story over at heavy.com. Portland mom says she was groped and assaulted by feds during protest arrest. It's, pretty straightforward stuff. But this is what's going on. And this is one of the reasons why people who are operating under the color of law, people who say that they have the authority that we the people, but from the days of the Constitutional Convention to today, that we the people have given them the right and authority to use force and violence against us in order to protect us. But the caveat that we have always put on that is that, but if they abuse that privilege, if they abuse that power, we can hold them individually responsible. But there is no possibility of holding the officer who groped this woman individually responsible because he had no name badge, he had no number, there was no identifying insignia. There's no way for her to say, yeah, that's the guy. This is so breathtakingly un-American. This is foundational to how tyranny works. This is foundational. This is the core stuff of authoritarian governance. This is the core stuff of essentially dictatorship. This is how governments that do not want to be held accountable by their people, yet claim that they're drawing their authority from the people. And they make that claim by holding sham elections. And you see this all around the world. You see it now in the Philippines. You see it now in Brazil. You see it now in the United States. Sham elections. State after state where, for example, the majority of the people voted for Democrats in Wisconsin. And yet the Republicans control their legislature. And it's not just Wisconsin. That's true of at least a half a dozen or a dozen states. The majority of Americans have not elected a Republican president since 1988. And then it took the Willie Horton ads to make it happen. So the hallmark of an authoritarian regime, which is what the Republican Party has become since the 1980s, is this, an absolute lack of accountability. Bill Barr saying, no, I'm not going to give you access to the Mueller report, even though it was written with the intention of making it public. No, we're not going to hold anybody accountable. You're not going to be able to even know who just tried to rape you under the pretense of being a police officer. You can't even know. Sorry. That is not democracy. That is not
You're
America.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
How long is America going to continue to tolerate this from the Republican Party? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the 2 governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next? How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then, in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book Defying Hitler.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Rich Wolf drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. You know, they say we're 100 days out from the election today. Actually, no. And I'm going to get into that in considerable detail in our next hour when we're going to be talking about, how's this election going to play out and what are the what are the Republicans up to? There's some amazing stuff out there that has to do with, they're starting already, refusing to certify elections. But anyhow, we'll talk about that in the next hour. Right now, I'd like to kind of stay on this topic and get your thoughts on all this. David in Tyler, Texas. Hey, David, it says here you were tell me the story.
Yes, Tyler is in Smith County, the county seat of Smith County. And I think our congressman is a guy I think the whole world knows about now, or at least the United States, is Louis Gohmert. So the Democrats have a fellow named Hank Gilbert that is running against him this time. And we had scheduled an event that you got to reserve the town square to do any kind of presence there. And so we were all going to show up at 2 o'clock, and I went early. And when I got there, now I'm hearing that they had scheduled another group as well. It was almost like a planned, maybe confrontation that they were counting on. So there were people filming, and there's a TV station that overlooks the square. And got there, and I've never seen so many automatic weapons in my life. And
was this the counter-protesters? Was that a bunch of right-wingers who showed up to counter-protest against your Democratic candidate?
Exactly. And we were overwhelmed. There were a lot of them. And they didn't look like the militia in Oregon, but they were all. And nobody had a hunting weapon. They were all AK-47s or something like that. And so we were just surrounded at everything. And I felt like, this Democratic group, there's a lot of older people there and coming by after church and that sort of thing. And before he got started, his microphone never got any electricity to it for a good while, and so he was going to talk with one of those bullhorns. And when I looked around, besides weapons, there were a number of people with bullhorns, and I mean from the get-go, they just drowned him out. He never got to talk about anything. And he's a nice guy, and part of the session was going to be us all getting together for a common discussion and not have a situation like in Oregon. And they started circling up and getting closer and closer and pushing and getting right in his face. And, we just stood it out for a long time. And nobody had a mask on their side. So you could distinguish our side because we all had masks on. And I had a sign that said, nobody is above the law. And I'm not sure, they realized what which side I was sleeping on, but there were no police presence at all, or at least that was visible. And it got worse and worse, and finally it was like a charge in the stage. So Hank and his group were packing up and fixing to leave, and they persisted. And there's a picture today. There was a film on it that got on Facebook, and his campaign manager got all beat up by 3 or 4 guys. And, and my concern was some of the elderly. I'm pretty elderly myself, and getting them out of the area into a safe place. And I mean, these guys persisted, and there wasn't any hesitation. And they were all organized, ready not to do anything but give grief. And I don't know if it was a Gomer or militia or where they came from or how it got organized. But there were a blend of camouflage and biker vests and, but I'll tell you, I've been in the area since 85, and I've never seen anything like this. I've camped out in Crawford and was messing with W, and nothing like this. I've protested in Dallas and Austin, and I've never seen anything like this in Texas, Tom. But finally, when people started getting bloody and somebody called the police, they came up and it started to calm down. But I think all of us are rattled, and I'm not sure anybody's going to come to listen to a Democratic candidate. That's what bothers me. And the rattled
This is how the brown shirts did it in Munich back in the 1920s. I mean, this is exactly, shouting down competing candidates, threatening them, physically beating up their supporters of people who opposed Hitler in the 1920s. This is before he was chancellor, before he had any political power. As he was rising to power, these volunteer militias would come in and beat the crap out of people. And Jesus, David, this is amazing.
This is a town of about 100,000 people, and Cornyn and Cruz have offices there. But this just stunk to high heaven that Gomer had a sign in this, and I don't know how to handle this. And it's the day after, so I know a lot of people are still stirred up like I am, and some that got punched, men and women, are trying to do some things about it. But it seems like the local media kind of set this up, or Gomer influenced the media. I don't know. I don't want to talk like a conspiracy theory, but it was way too organized. You could tell that these guys were there early, and they weren't going to listen or let us talk about anything. So
clearly they don't believe in democracy or a democratic process or a political process for that matter. They just believe in force. It's mind-boggling. David, will you keep us up to date? I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Will you keep us up to date?
Appreciate you, Tom.
Okay. Thanks a lot, David. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, you were in the demonstrations this weekend?
Yeah, and every day for the last 2 months. I just wanted to talk. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the gas. One of the callers was describing their perspective down there. I wanted to say last week I got hit with gas pretty hard, and I wasn't suited up properly for it, and my lymph nodes swelled up really bad. My neck was stiff. It's really nasty stuff, and so I just wanted to share. I couldn't find anything. I was looking online for stuff that you can do after exposure. I've only been able to find things for when you're exposed to it, which is the saline and all that other stuff. But I wanted to tell people if they're experiencing what I experienced, that activated charcoal and the niacin with the flush is, I found it took the swelling down in my lymph nodes within a day. But that seems to be getting out a lot of the trace
I would say drink a hell of a lot of water too, Robbie. I mean, that just
absolutely,
flush stuff out of your body.
Yeah, when you take activated charcoal and niacin, water is definitely a huge part of that too. So I just wanted to share those two things. But also the CS gas that they're using is expired. A lot of people are going around and they're collecting the spent canisters, and they're looking at it, and they're expired by months, maybe years, some of it, which they're finding out is the CS gas turns into something, I think it's like cyanide. It turns into something different when it's old, there's also new video. So thankfully we had our court rule that journalists cannot be targeted. So now they're able to film after the feds, and it's crazy. They'll just lob like 30 or I don't know how many. They'll just lob all those tear gas canisters. There was a tornado in the street, but not a tornado, but like a dust devil. There was a dust devil of tear gas in the street that I saw the other night. And also when you go down to the Justice Center, those whole blocks, when cars drive by, it kicks it up. So when you get to the Justice Center, you do want to wear, long sleeve clothes, a mask of some sort. But yeah, it's weird. So these feds were actually going through and collecting certain canisters that they didn't want us to see. So that's also some concern there. But yeah, be safe when you go down there. And shout out to Mom Tifa.
You too, Robbie.
Shout out to Mom Tifa. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Robbie. Good to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
What's it going to take for Americans to wake up to the fact that what we're looking at is absolute authoritarianism? It's tyranny, literally. And welcome back. Cassandra in Camas, Washington. Hey, Cassandra, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. Very quickly, two things. One, I would like to let you guys know that I live in the orchards in Vancouver, Washington. I work in Camas. Anyway, on Saturday, I was putting up air conditioner because into the window, knowing that Sunday we're going to have a heat wave. Here we go. My son and I are out doing this. And suddenly he goes, Mom, look. And I turn around, and there is a camouflage, what looks like military Jeep with the sides taken off, and guys in full-body armor with automatic guns, and they are going down our street. Now, our street is totally suburbs, and they're going very slowly, and they are looking like they are there to make their presence felt. It's 12:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. Why are they on our streets? We are nowhere near anything they should be militarily. This was not military. They didn't have.
How do you know this wasn't just a bunch of wannabe soldiers? A bunch of right-wing yahoos.
Exactly. That's the point. Who knows what this is bringing out and bringing on? Yes, that's very frightening when people feel that they have the right to go down your street in full military, camouflage-looking type outfits with automatic weaponry. I just sat there with my mouth open. I've lived there 14 years, never seen anything like it. What the hell? Sorry, probably shouldn't say that on radio.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You can say that word.
Okay, so it was just dumbfounding. Now, the other thing I wanted to really call in initially to say was Again, I'm an older single parent with a son who has a lot of physical problems. He's battling going deaf at the moment. He has 5 different things that are, frankly, very frightening to deal with. He has a compromised immune system. Okay, so I feel that I cannot, because I'm his only resource in life, I cannot go and put myself out on the protest line. But there are other ways to protest, and that's my point. So what I've done is, protesting is you make people hear your voice. You have them see you. We've had the rallies in Vancouver where they had the cars because of COVID, where everybody did. Well, why not pepper your car now? That's what I do. I put on signs. I put on stickers and everything I can, anything from capitalism and racism is killing us all. Black Lives Matter sticker. Children aren't guinea pigs. Don't open schools. Whatever. Find your thing that you need to protest, but let it be heard. Let it be seen all the time, so that this is in their face. That's my thought on. There's a way.
You haven't
to make
had anybody try to run you off the road or anything?
I have had some very interesting responses, oddly enough. I go to everywhere with, whether I'm going to the grocery store or wherever I'm going, my car goes with me when I go to work, because I do go to work. I haven't had anyone honk at me, try to run me off the road. I've had people stop when it's parked and look at the stickers and read them. I've had a couple of older gentlemen comment that it's about time somebody said something, and they thanked me for it. So you can actually get people to see it and understand, and without them feeling threatened.
Right.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Anyway,
Cassandra, thanks for the call, and thanks for your activism. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Paul in Illinois. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how are you? I heard you talking about these rubber bullets. Now, I don't think that American people understand what a rubber bullet is. A rubber bullet is about 1.25 inches in diameter. It's solid rubber, and it's about 5 inches long. Now, when you find, and the reason that I know about it, I was born and brought up with the Troubles in Belfast, and they actually banned the use of these rubber bullets, because when you fire them, you're supposed to hit the ground before it hits the person. That's the law of engagement when you fire a rubber bullet. You hit the ground in front of the rioters, and that takes the sting out of it so it doesn't kill you. But, I mean, there was a young girl, 9 years of age, coming from the shop from our mother centre. She was hit by a rubber bullet and killed stone dead right in the spot, Tom. These things are lethal. And then what the British Army used to do, Tom, they would hollow them out, because they're solid rubber. They would sit in their barracks at night, hollow them out, and put 2 D batteries inside and tape it back together. So when they fired this thing, you were being hit by 2 D batteries, not a rubber bullet.
Wow.
So that's
so we've had 5 people, including 2 or 3 journalists, who have been blinded in one eye by these so-called rubber bullets. I prefer to call them 40 millimeter munitions, and the ones that they're using now in the United States actually have metal on the inside, and they're coated with hard plastic. They don't even make them out of rubber anymore, the ones that they're using here right now, Paul. And
they were called the plastic bullet at home, Tom. We had 2. We had a plastic bullet and a rubber bullet. They're 2 different fires that they use, 2 different munitions they use to fire. But
they can kill. They do kill about 1% of the time, and they maim people 18% of the time, cause permanent, lifelong injury. and you're
They're
not
lethal.
supposed to shoot these things above the waist, as you point out. I didn't know about the shoot against the ground thing. That may be unique to Ireland, but here in the United States, you're supposed to not shoot above the waist, and they have been intentionally targeting people's heads. I mean, it's just all over the place. It's like
absolutely,
Yeah,
Tom. And if American people really, really honestly knew what the damage these things can do and the size of them, I just think they might help them understand the lethalness of these things.
Yeah, amazing. Paul, thank you for the call. Yeah, good talk. I'm sorry, Paul. There's a slight delay there, and I missed that you were going to say something else to me. My apologies. John in Portland, Oregon. Hey, John, you were at the protest?
Yeah, Tom, I sure was. I've been out a few nights. I actually went to March 3 or 4 times and avoided downtown intentionally until the feds came into town. But I went out on Saturday night just because it's unacceptable to have feds on our street. And I went down with some friends of mine who are teachers, and we joined the teacher block. And we went downtown and got in behind the moms. And at the first sign of the protesters finding any fireworks, even just in the air, is when the feds opened tear gas on us.
John, let me just interrupt you for a second. You're talking really fast, and it's really hard to understand you. If you've got me on a speakerphone or Bluetooth or whatever it may be, could you just go to
this is only my second time.
Okay. If you could just, use just a regular phone or something. I don't know what's causing your phone to be so muffled.
Sure.
Or just keep going, but continue.
So we went down and got behind the mom wall, and things started getting heated up, and they were trying to pull down the fence. And that's when the feds came out and started pepper spraying all of us, shooting us with pepper balls in the face. I saw one kid get shot in the eye, and probably going to lose the eye. It was pretty well swollen. But then shortly after that is when I saw him grab that one mom and yank her into the crowd. I saw her pull her in after they had beaten the other mom on the boob. And then they flanked us from 3 sides and drove us down to the 7-Eleven, which is about 4 or 5 blocks away from us there, firing tear gas canisters there at us. They shot out a back window of one of the cars, and it incinerated the back seat, caught it on fire. Fortunately, one of the medics put the fire out. But it was just brutal down there. There's no reason for them to be using CS gas in the streets that way. You can't breathe when you get down in the area.
Wow. So you saw this woman who got this woman who was sexually assaulted by one of these stormtroopers. You saw her being dragged out of the line.
Yeah. They came out into the line, and they were one of the moms was up in their face. They were telling them that they didn't belong here and trying to protect their children. Mostly asking them to identify themselves because they're all wearing camouflage, and it's really difficult to see what their patches or insignias are. All you can see is an American flag patch, but yeah, sure, anybody can claim an American flag patch. At one point later in the evening, I walked up to one of the officers to try and look at his patch, and one of the other officers grabbed me by the chest and tried to pull me behind the line. Fortunately, a half a dozen protesters grabbed a hold of me and pulled me back into the crowd of protest to prevent me from getting pulled into the federal building.
Wow. And it's amazing. Yeah. John, thank you for the call. Thanks for sharing your story.
Security and ICE.
Say that again?
All I can make out on the uniforms is DHS or ICE.
I see. Yeah. I think that what's going on here is that Customs and Border Patrol has since Trump became president, they've basically become his personal police force, and he's been interacting with these guys a lot. They're operating. They themselves, some of their members of themselves have in the past talked to the media about basically being an independent paramilitary, separate from supervision by the Department of Homeland Security. It's become his goon squad. He's developing his own personal police department or his own personal stormtroopers, shock troopers, and that's what you guys are confronting, John. And this is not
different. The Fed did.
Yeah. And this is not how in a democracy, in a republic, this is not how in a republic the people who have the authority to arrest or kill you behave. John, thank you for the call. They should behave in a way that allows at least some accountability. This woman who was groped and molested, this mom of a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old who was essentially raped by these federal goons, has no way of knowing who it was who did it. How do you hold them accountable? We'll be back about the election.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps Hair Loss Treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we have recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, "In light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads, and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Caution to the Winds. The book, The Age of Illusion by Andrew Basovich.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've talked about the election, a lot, right? It's 99 days from today and, roughly 100 days away. At least that's the story that the media is putting out. The fact of the matter is that in many states, 39 states and the District of Columbia, there is early voting. And in some states, the early voting starts roughly 50 days from now. So the election is not 100 days away. The election, there are say 55 days from now. Some states allow voting as early as 45 days. 20 states, plus the District of Columbia, provide for early voting on Saturday. A great piece of this over at Daily Kos by Old Redneck. 4 additional states, California, Kansas, Vermont, and Massachusetts, leave it up to the county clerk if they're going to allow Saturday voting. Delaware and Virginia allow it. Sunday voting in 5 states, Alaska, Illinois, Maryland, New York, and Ohio. 5 states leave it up to the county clerks, California, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Massachusetts, etc. But the bottom line is that this is happening right now, or it will be, in 6 weeks, basically. The election is going to start. And that's one of the reasons that Trump is hysterically trying to create unrest in our cities so that he can replicate what Richard Nixon did in 1968 after you had the police riot at the Democratic National Convention in the summer of '68, and you had the assassination of Martin Luther King, which led to numerous cities on fire in 1968. And Donald Trump is trying to bring that back. This is Roger Stone, who was Nixon's advisor, one of Nixon's advisors back then. This is, Richard Nixon on steroids. The other concern that I've expressed, and I wrote an op-ed about this a couple of months ago, and I need to write another one. I need to get this out there more frequently, although a lot of people are quoting that original op-ed and quoting what I've been saying on the air, is that, we saw this happen in the election of 1876. And, Samuel Tilden won the majority of the Electoral College votes and won the majority of the popular vote. But he did not end up president of the United States. Instead, the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes became president of the United States. And the reason why is because the 12th Amendment, in part, that was a little more complex because there was a whole deal about any Reconstruction. But the bottom line is basically, this is what happened in 1876 and it can happen again. If a couple of states refuse to certify the vote, that's all they have to do. Just say, we can't certify the vote because, and just fill in the blanks on the because. We can't certify the vote. If a couple of large red states refuse to certify the vote, then the Electoral College vote goes from what you and I did at the ballot box to the U.S. House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, each state has one vote, and that vote is determined by a vote of the majority of the senators and representatives of that state's legislature. The governor doesn't even have any say in it. And so we've got roughly 30 states that have Republican-controlled or Republican majority combined House and Senate legislatures. So Donald Trump would win 30-20 in the Electoral College under the 12th Amendment. And it's already starting in San Antonio. This story from KSAT, the local TV station, Dateline San Antonio, after a bruising defeat in the runoff election for Bexar County GOP chair. Now, this is somebody who's simply running to be chairman or chairperson of the Republican Party in this one county in Texas. Cynthia Brem announced on Thursday she will not certify the results. She argued that the Bexar County Elections Department did not produce official signed chain of custody documents for 31 voting centers and did not post a guard to make sure that the early voting data was safe. She said there is an active investigation. Now, according to the tabulation that came out, this was a Republican primary, right? These are Republican voters. The Republican voters in Bexar County voted in favor of her opponent, John Austin, who got 2/3 of the votes. But because she is the existing chair, by the way, she is one of these right-wing nutcases, right? On Facebook, she posted this whole thing about how George Floyd's death was actually staged, that, for political reasons, to help to hurt Donald Trump, et cetera, right? One of these right-wing crazed conspiracy mongers. And she says, I'm not going to step down. I'm not going to certify this election. Now, where did she get that idea? How extensively is this being discussed in Republican circles? And what might be one of the things that causes the Republicans to say, Ron DeSantis in Florida or, pick your state, right? There's a half a dozen, but it would have to be one of the large states, Greg Abbott in Texas, for example. What might cause them to do that? What excuse might they use? Well, how about, we've got tens of thousands of absentee votes that arrived after the deadline. And, we need to find out what's going on with this. So we're not going to certify the vote. Or there's some question about this. And this is where it gets very interesting. Mark Sumner, writing for the Daily Kos, the headline, "You Don't Have Mail. New Postmaster General is generating exactly the anger and distrust that Trump wants." Now, you recall, I've pointed out to you that David Stockman articulated this. He wasn't the guy who invented it, but during the Reagan presidency, They were operating under a strategy that both David Stockman and Ronald Reagan referred to, and George Herbert Walker Bush referred to as starve the beast. The beast, of course, is the government of the United States of America. Starve that beast. And so and the way it works is you cut back on funding to federal agencies to the point that they can no longer do their jobs. Social Security, for example, right now it takes 2 years to get a Social Security disability application even reviewed. Donald Trump gave early retirement. There's something like 65,000 employees for Social Security. It's in that neighborhood. And gave early retirement to 15,000 people. So there's just nobody there to take your call, right? Or to evaluate your application. So you starve the beast, and when you starve the beast, then you point out that the beast isn't working anymore, and then you say, and by the way, we should privatize it. Well, it turns out Postmaster DeJoy, according to his federally required transparency statements, conflict of interest statements, has, quote, between $30 million and $75 million in assets in U.S. Postal Service competitors or contractors. So you've got the guy who's the head of the post office right now. Trump put him into place. His only credential, he by the way, he's the first person in more than half a century to have not been a postal employee, to not have been a letter carrier. The guy in charge, his only credential is that he raised a pile of money for Donald Trump, and he's got $70 million, up to $70 million invested in companies that compete with the post office. And here's the story. Very straightforward. In New Jersey, residents say they're going days without mail. In Chicago, citizens complain that their deliveries are running weeks behind. California residents are fretting over mortgages and rents put in jeopardy by a mail service that seems frozen. Other customers are finding that bills are arriving too late. That can mean running up additional costs in medical bills or losing a credit card when it could be a vital lifeline. The critical factor seems to be changes introduced by Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, the guy who's got $70 million of his own personal wealth invested in competitors to the post office. He's implemented a major change in the way the post office operates, reducing overtime and cutting back on the number of daily deliveries. Surprise, surprise. By the way, when he said that the post office should run like a business, he pointed out that a lot of businesses fail.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is insane. And then on top of this, you got to hear what the RNC is up to with Jared Kushner and Donald Trump as grift continues. And welcome back. What an amazing time, huh? What an absolutely amazing time. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for informing us about the lunacy that's going on in this country. And it's so amazing to me. Not really amazing, but a lot of people know a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump is doing and was going to do. We are not standing up for this country. A lot of us are not standing up for this country. More of us voted for Hillary Clinton, and we let this loophole that they got in this country called the Electoral College.
Well, more of us voted for Al Gore, too. We have not, the majority of Americans have not elected a Republican president since 1988.
So how is it we continue to allow these people to run roughshod over the majority of people? We have to learn how to come together and stop paying attention to what the media tell us, because they sell fear so they can sell more media so they can sell more fear. They're in that vicious cycle, and we get caught up in it, not realizing that there's another way out. So we have to realize, and you get 100 million people that don't participate in voting in this country, and we've in a sense earned the dishonesty and the ruthlessness that's in that White House because we don't stand up for this country. And if we don't stand up for this country, we're going to lose it. And we think that this is owed to us, like this country is something that we're entitled to and that it's going to be here forever.
So, Tyrone, you said You said that we need to stand up. How do you suggest that we do this?
We need to recognize our agenda is the same thing, to save this country from being destroyed by greedy.
How do we do it?
Like you said, got to continue to stay in contact with each other. Be able to, like you said, push back. Yeah. We got to stop falling for this when people are protesting, and there are some people that have their own agenda. You know how they send in these people that are specific reason for going there is to disrupt the whole march. We need to identify these people and recognize them and isolate ourselves from them people when they wreak havoc. Because there are a few people who filmed when the Black Lives Matter protest was going on of just vandalizing. And they said, listen, these people are not with us, and they wreaking havoc.
No, I get it. It seems to me, Tyrone, that there's basically a couple of things that we all can do that are fairly obvious. Number one, protest. We need to make ourselves visible to the extent that we can do that safely. Don't protest if you're older or if you have an immune compromised or whatever. But you get what I'm saying. Number one, show up. Number two, inform everybody you know, which you mentioned. Do it on social media. Do it any way you can. We had a caller earlier who has anti-Trump bumper stickers all over her car. And number three, of course, make sure that you're registered to vote and get everybody you know registered to vote and follow that process through. Am I missing anything? Is there a fourth you can add?
When the Democrats get in office, we got to go strong, man. We got to go strong.
Yeah, I'm with you. No, if the Democrats, God willing, Tyrone, if the Democrats can seize the House, the Senate, and the White House, we have to make some substantial changes in the way this country operates. Tyrone, thank you for the call. Great to hear from you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history, and the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. Just think about it for a second. But this is used as justification by right-wingers, particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, poor people, their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. So you've got Republicans running for Congress all over the country. They're running for the U.S. House of Representatives. And the organization, the Republican organization that typically funds Republicans who are running for office is called the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. We've got the DCCC, there's the RCCC, essentially. And the RCCC has gone to the RNC. Actually, it's not the RCCC, it's called the National Republican Congressional Committee, the NRCC. My apologies, I got it wrong. It's the NRCC, their version of the DCCC. And so this group that supports Republicans who are running for the U.S. House of Representatives all over the country, this group has gone to the Republican National Committee, the RNC, which is run by Mitt Romney's niece, Ronna Romney McDaniel, and said, how about some cash, guys? Y'all helped us in previous elections. You got billionaires giving you money. How about shoveling some of it in our direction? But it turns out that the Republican committee, the RNC, doesn't actually control their own cash. The head of the Republican Party, the head of any political party, frankly, when a president of that party is in office, is the president. So the head of the Democratic Party during Obama's presidency, it wasn't Tom Perez, or whoever was party chair at the time. It was Barack Obama. It was President Obama. The head of the Republican Party when George Bush was president was George Bush. The head of the Republican Party right now is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has delegated responsibility for all the money that the Republican National Committee, the RNC, passes out. He has delegated responsibility for all that money to Jared Kushner. And Jared Kushner has been, along with Trump, and there's been quite a bit of reporting on this over the last week and a half or so, how the Trump organization and Donald Trump himself have personally sucked literally tens of millions of dollars of campaign donor dollars out of the RNC. You hold an event, the RNC will hold an event at the Trump Hotel. Normally a room would go for $100 a night. Suddenly the rooms are $700 a night. Normally a ballroom would be $10,000. Suddenly the ballroom's $100,000. I'm just making up numbers here, but this is essentially how it works. And it's well documented and easily searchable. You can find this without any problem at all. And there's also a threshold for reporting. And they have been making sure that all of the transfers of money from the RNC to these various Trump organizations always are like $10 below that threshold. And that was part of the big story that got broken last week by a number of reporters, was how millions and millions of dollars are being siphoned out of the RNC and given to Donald Trump. He's just putting it in his pocket. I'm getting fundraising letters like 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day now from the Trump campaign. I've gotten 2 fundraising letters in the last 3 days from Don Trump Jr. telling me that I can have an advance copy of his book, his new book about liberals that he's got coming out. Obviously, he's trying to push it to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. But the money is going to be going to where? Donald Trump Jr. But it's the Trump campaign that's asking for this. So the Trump crime family, this family of grifters, and Jared Kushner is right in the middle of it. His own father went to prison for financial fraud, for ripping people off. Jared Kushner is saying to the Republican committee, we're not going to release money to the NRCC. We're not going to give money to these Republican members of Congress. And this has, quote, frustrated, end quote, Kevin McCarthy, who is the House Minority Leader. He's the guy who's in charge of the Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives. Not the brightest bulb on the tree, but he does know that without money to run for re-election, this is pretty impressive. This is a report from the Washington Post. And I quote, this is from the Washington Post, quote, McCarthy specifically has asked Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, to make a financial commitment to the House Republicans, according to several officials familiar with the discussions who spoke on the condition of anonymity. But Kushner, who oversees such decisions and has a greater say than RNC chairwoman Ronna Romney McDaniel, has refused thus far, the officials say. According to one White House insider, quote, the campaign, that's the Trump campaign, just wants the money. They don't care about the House. That's not their concern. And essentially, the argument that's being made by Kushner is we've already lost the House. The Democrats control the House. We're going to lose more House seats in the next election. Why should we put any money at all into House of Representatives races? We've got to hang on to the White House so that we can promote our fascist agenda, so that we can turn America from a republic into an oligarchy, from a republic into an autocracy, from a republic into a fascist state. That's where all our effort needs to go. Which brings me back to my question from the first hour. How long is it going to take Republicans to figure out how badly they've been conned and scammed by not just the Trump crime family, but the GOP in general for decades now? We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. It's talk media for the sane among us. Stick around.
Our book club book for today is Talk Radio's America by Brian Rosenwald, subtitled How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Then Took Over the United States. This is from the introduction. August 1, 1988 marked the beginning of the long road to President Donald Trump. But even political junkies took little notice of the fateful events that unfolded that day as a failed disc jockey and former Kansas City Royals executive named Rush Hudson Limbaugh III made his national radio debut. Only a small audience tuned in. So poorly commemorated was the moment that we don't even know how many stations broadcast day one of Limbaugh's syndicated program. Limbaugh claims the show began on 56 affiliates, while other counts range from 57 and 87. From the beginning, the show was brash, entertaining, controversial, and boundary-pushing. Before Limbaugh, this sort of programming did not exist outside major cities. In 1983, there were just 59 talk radio stations nationwide, and the program on many of those stations consisted of advice shows, staged interviews, and caller-driven discussions of everything from neighborhood schools to abominable snowmen. Most talk radio programming focused on local concerns, and most of the industry's stars, such as Larry King and Jesse Raphael, had left-of-center views but rarely shared them. At the time of Limbaugh's national debut, talk radio had negligible political impact. In talk radio hotbeds such as Boston, hosts might influence local and statewide policy debates, especially on visceral issues such as seatbelt laws, but talk radio was not a partisan force, and it had no role in national politics. In fact, the wall-to-wall conservative political talk stations that dominate the AM airwaves today were impossible until 1987, thanks to a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine. That year, however, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated the policy, which required broadcasters of opinionated programming on controversial issues to offer an array of viewpoints. In this more permissive environment, Limbaugh would go on to revolutionize the radio business. In doing so, he helped unintentionally to spawn a major new political player. Within a decade, the broadcast format he inaugurated aired on more than 1,000 stations and kept millions company as they commuted, worked, and shouted back at their radios. It took just a few years before conservative talk radio began to influence national politics and public policy. That influence only grew throughout the decades as the business changed. Over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, the number of nationally syndicated talk shows rose dramatically, and the content of talk radio programs became increasingly political and conservative. Liberal pundits and some scholars agree on the broad outlines of the story. Conservative station executives, conspiring with their Republican allies, built a format modeled on Limbaugh's program, and thousands of Limbaugh wannabes cropped up all over the country. Executives, hosts, and politicians turned talk radio into an appendage of the Republican Party, using the platform to get Republicans elected and advance the party's agenda. The success of talk radio led to the development of partisan and ideological cable news networks, and some hosts complemented their radio shows with primetime cable programs. Eventually, this content found a home in the new digital sphere, with equally strident cheerleaders proliferating on blogs and other online publications. This narrative makes sense, especially to liberals. After all, many conservative media executives and their corporate political action committees donate to Republican candidates, and most hosts champion conservative candidates and causes. But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two, But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two distinct, complex tales. Neither has anything to do with a conspiracy to create a media servant of the Republican Party. The first describes how talk radio spread across America, in the process saving AM radio from financial ruin. Limbaugh had no intention of affecting elections or legislation, and no inkling that he could. Nor did any of his early successors. The executives who gave these hosts a chance also had no interest in political outcomes. Hosts and their bosses were in business. They wanted to captivate listeners and make money, and they discovered, essentially by accident, that conservative political talk in the mouth of an entertaining personality achieved this. Conservative hosts had strong opinions, but their primary goal was, and still is, financial gain. And it is because they realized financial gain that more and more stations invested in their style and content, while divesting from competing formats. The second story concerns talk radio's transformation after 1995 into an almost entirely conservative and doctrinaire medium that eventually spawned successors in other media, took over the Republican Party, and reshaped it in hosts' and listeners' image. Limbaugh was a great innovator, but he didn't change American media and politics all at once or on his own. In conservative talk radio's early days, hosts shared stations with liberal talkers and apolitical programs. There was not an immediate sense that conservative radio was the future either. But gradually, its success snowballed thanks to trial and error in the radio business, regulatory changes, political events, happenstance, and most importantly, listener behavior. Hosts also got a boost from marginalized conservative Republican politicians who realized that talk radio would enable them to circumnavigate the mainstream media, and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science is a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're 100 days out or 99 days out from the election, but really, early voting starts in, I think, 55 days in a lot of states. Chairman of the DNC, Tom Perez, the former U.S. Secretary of Labor, is with us. Democrats.org, of course, the DNC's website. You can tweet him at Tom Perez. Secretary Perez, or Chairman Perez, welcome back to the program. Where are we at right now? We've got. I'm looking at a whole bunch of different stories here that really concern me. Several different cities, we've got people saying that the mail has been slowed down substantially, and yet people want to vote by mail. You've got Donald Trump promoting this hoax. We have you were the former labor secretary. We just ran out of unemployment insurance. We don't know where that's going. We've got, the convention coming in a couple of weeks. John Lewis line in state. There's so much to talk about. Where do we start?
Yes. Well, I would probably start with John Lewis because, he's a hero to me, a hero to you, and a hero to so many across this country. And I was working for Senator Kennedy in the 90s, and I had the privilege of helping to draft the original version of what became the Shepherd Bird Hate Crime Prevention Act, which took 14 years to pass, by the way. And when we were looking for the original co-sponsor in the House, Senator Kennedy, the liberal lion of the Senate, said, well, that's an easy question to answer. And I remember sitting in a meeting with Senator Kennedy and Congressman Lewis, and I'm a 30-something staffer there, just sort of pinching myself because I'm in the presence of just two remarkable leaders. And, John Lewis said, voting is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have to create a more perfect union. And all the points you raised, Tom, in your run-up to your question for me are true. We've got the most dangerous president in American history. I used to run the Civil Rights Division. I saw voter suppression when I ran it. I sued many states. This president's trying to do voter suppression on steroids. We know that, but we've been preparing for that for some time. We have the most, I think, muscular voter protection operation that we've ever had. And it's not just we at the DNC and the Biden campaign, but it's the Democratic ecosystem. We've had a lot of success moving forward. We still have a ton more work to do. I don't deny that at all. And it's going to involve both organizing, educating, litigating, all of the above and then some. But I am confident that we can do this, Tom. You look at the last 3 years, and what they've had in common is Democrats have been turning out at scale. We've been showing up because we know that our democracy as we know it is on the line. And we do have 99 days left. although you correctly point out that voting starts earlier, September 14th in Arizona, for instance. So we're very, very focused on making sure people know their rights, making sure that people have choice. If you want to vote in person, we need to make sure you can do that. If you want to vote early, we want to maximize the number of early days. If you want to vote absentee, vote by mail, we want to make sure that those systems are in place. And that's why we're working with state authorities, with local authorities. Our lawsuit in Wisconsin is still pending. We helped 142,000 people in the April primary exercise their right to vote as a result of that litigation. So we're using every tool in our toolbox. And the most important thing I would say to people is, remember John Lewis. He gave us our marching orders. Get out there and vote. Get your neighbors and friends who are eligible to vote, and help them to vote as well.
Sir, as you we're talking with Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC. As I'm guessing you probably know, in 1876, in the election of 1876, the Democrat Samuel Tilden won the majority vote in the United States and also won a majority of the Electoral College votes. But he did not become president. Instead, the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes became president. And in part, the reason why was because although Tilden had a majority of both popular votes and Electoral College votes, he hadn't hit the threshold of 50% plus one of the Electoral College, because you had 3 southern states that were then occupied by the Union Army that whose governments refused to certify the vote. Plus the state of Oregon, which was occupied by the Klan at the time. They refused to certify the vote. And as a result of those 4 states refusing to certify the vote, under the 12th Amendment, the vote gets thrown to the U.S. House of Representatives, and each state has 1 vote. And that vote is determined not by the congressional delegation. That vote is determined by a vote of the House and Senate of each one of those states. So the Michigan House of Representatives and the Michigan Senate, where everybody has 1 vote equally, combined would vote, for example, and they're controlled by Republicans, even though they have a Democratic governor. The governor has no say in this. And so if this were to happen, if Florida and Texas were to, for example, refuse to certify the vote and it gets thrown into the House, you've got roughly 30 states that have Republican-controlled legislatures that would vote for Donald Trump. Do you guys have a contingency plan for this? I've been hearing about this for almost 4 months from Republican operatives that I still know from when I worked in Washington, D.C. I wrote an op-ed about it a couple months ago. I don't see anybody talking about it. Am I in crazy land here, or is this something that you guys are taking seriously?
Well, we take everything seriously, Tom. But I think the most important thing that we can do, and one of the concerns I have, quite frankly, is Donald Trump wants everybody to be in the fetal position, fearful, so they don't get out there and vote. That's why he's denigrating vote by mail. That's why he's doing all these voter ID laws. They have a $20 million voter suppression budget. And you know what? He tried to do that in 2018. He tried to do that in 2019, and it did not work. And I want to make sure that people are understanding that when you get out there and vote, it makes a huge difference. And when our people get out there and vote, we will win. The thing I learned from Ted Kennedy, and the thing that Joe Biden understands that Donald Trump doesn't, is the politics of arithmetic. Addition beats subtraction any day of the week. Joe Biden's base of support continues to expand. Suburban voters who were with Donald Trump in 2016, overwhelmingly with Joe Biden. Senior citizens who went for Trump in 2016 by about 8 points. Now they're for Biden by 5 or 6 points. Young people who came out in a much bigger force in 2018 are continuing that momentum, and we're doing really well there. Our investments in African American, Latino, Native American, Asian American communities, I think, have been unprecedented over the last 3-4 years.
That's all great stuff, Chairman Perez. But respectfully, it sounds to me like you're saying that you guys don't have a plan to deal with the 12th Amendment challenge.
Well, I don't think there's going to be a 12th Amendment challenge, Tom. We have a plan.
Okay.
There's about 15 different contingencies that people have talked about. But I think the most important response to this, and I sometimes worry that we
win overwhelmingly.
Come to me and say, Tom, the biggest response is to win and win overwhelmingly. And our battlefield is expanding. We're investing in Texas right now because the last 3-4 polls I've seen have shown basically a dead heat. Biden up by a couple, which is a dead heat. We have tremendous opportunity in Arizona, not only to win for Biden, but for Mark Kelly and to flip the state house and the state senate. Our battlefields are expanding. Our arithmetic is expanding because we have a coalition that we're building of hardcore Democrats, independents, Party of Lincoln Republicans. And remember, the Party of Lincoln, and you are a great historian, was once the party of civil rights. The party of Trump is the party of extremism. I might be one of the only people in America who's been past the Rutherford Hayes Museum, which is in Ohio. So when you mentioned him, I was smiling about that. But I think the most important thing we can do, and again, our voter protection operation is unlike anything that we have seen before. And the ecosystem, whether it's Eric Holder's group, Stacey Abrams' group, other groups that have emerged, I think we're working together like never before. And that's how we succeed. That's how we succeeded in Wisconsin in April. You may recall, Tom, Republicans tried to steal that race for state Supreme Court by weaponizing the pandemic. It didn't work because we out-hustled them. The party chair there is awesome, guy named Ben Wickler, no stranger to your show and to your listeners, a great leader, and we worked hand in hand. And, those Supreme Court races are usually, the last 2 or 3 have been won or lost by about 10 to 20,000 votes. We won by 140,000 votes. We kicked butt in that race. We out-hustled them in Wisconsin. And you look in Michigan, you look in Pennsylvania, you look across the country. That's what we have to do, folks. John Lewis gave us our marching orders. Get out there and vote. Make sure everyone you know who's eligible does the same thing. That's how we take
you're singing my song.
Back.
That's been my mantra for some time here. That and show up and wake people the hell up. Yep. Tom Perez, chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Thank you, Chairman Perez. Great talking with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. I'd just like to offer a little bit of wisdom to folks out there in those cities where there is a federal occupying force and they're trying to have peaceful protests and are being interloped upon. There's something that an individual or a few individuals can do in dealing with criminality and civil liability where brutality is committed. Have an individual or few that are designated as image gatherers. You can exist on the periphery or behind the crowd. You can move in the shadows and shoot faces and unique characteristics on a long lens.
Yeah, these guys are all wearing gas masks. You can't see their faces, Eric.
Well, they're taking them off to take a drink and wipe sweat. That's why this person has to be independent of the group, kind of a reconnaissance scout that moves around, follows the troops, not the protesters. And you catch them doing things like, food and drink, changing gear. They'll take gloves off, roll sleeves. You can get tattoos, faces, and then follow them to the vehicles they go to after they're done with being in their unmarked rental cars. It's slow and arduous, but it is indeed the best kind of fact gathering you can do. And then these people can be held to account later. There's no other way to have faceless, masked, stormtrooping brown shirts in your town. So they got it.
Yeah, accountability is a really, really, really big thing. And, I'm not suggesting we should be doxing people, but we do need to know who they are and where they came from and all that kind of thing. Thank you, Eric. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm watching what's going on downtown online on Twitch, and I wanted to just make people aware of that, because I live very close to downtown. I hear the explosions, and I can watch online, see them deploying their tear gas and their weapons and their flashbang grenades, and then hear the delayed sound about 2 minutes later. My friends are calling me from all over the country and wondering what's going on, and frankly, I'm a little embarrassed simply because even I am somewhat unaware. I read the news account this morning in the Oregonian. It was really pathetic. It was just scant milquetoast about what happened last night. I watched in horror as this young woman was slammed to the ground. Her face was bloody. There were 5 soldiers standing on her. She was screaming, "I can't breathe." There was an older woman trying to come over and get her name and help her. There were news accounts there of these burning tear gas projectiles that go into tents, into medics' tents, and to cars that are threatening to cause fires. You really have to watch the unedited Twitch feeds and the reporters that are down there. These, I don't know if they're citizen reporters or guerrilla reporters or what, but they're really astonishing because everything is so highly edited and censored. There was nothing on the local radio or TV all day. There's, sports news. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic.
It's all been sanitized, Jonathan, because none of the news editors want to be accused of inciting a riot.
They wouldn't be inciting a riot.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, I still recall the day that federal agents, when I was 17 years old, came to the radio station where I worked, WITL in Lansing, Michigan, and told us that we should not report on a bunch of tax protesters that they were arresting because they didn't want the protests to go viral, essentially. I mean, I just have to believe that that's going on now. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. And there's a really troubling concatenation of events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Dan in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Good. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'll try to make this as fast as I can. I just wanted to comment on the Tom Perez interview that you just had with him. I just wanted to just let everybody know how uncomfortable that whole interview made me feel. It made me feel like the Democratic leadership has no idea what's about to happen on Election Day. And I think that's like the biggest problem that people have.
Well, that's assuming that my analysis is accurate, Dan. What he's saying essentially is that he believes that there'll be such an overwhelming victory if if right across the board Democrats show up to vote. He believes that there'll be such an overwhelming victory that the Republicans won't be able to pull this thing out of the hat. And even if some states refuse to certify the election, there'll still be enough that they're over the 50% mark with the Electoral College, which is hopefully true. But it concerned me too that it didn't seem like he was familiar with that. But, the other thing, Dan, that this reminds me of is when Randy Rhoads and me and a bunch of other people from Air America, progressive talk show. This was back in 2005, as I recall, maybe 2006. We went to Washington, D.C. and met with a handful, maybe 6 to 8, more or less, Democratic members of the House and Senate. Bernie was there. There were a number of people whose names you would immediately recognize. And I brought up the issue, or maybe Randy brought it up. One of us brought up the issue of the fact that we thought that looking at the 2002, 2004 elections, that voting machines were being hacked and that there was something funky, went on in Ohio in the 2004 election. And we wanted the Democratic Party to publicize this and investigate it. And one of those Democratic senators who later ran for president, said to us, "We don't want to scare the voters. We're concerned that if we tell the voters that there might be a problem, that their vote might not be counted, that the machines aren't reliable, that people will then not show up to vote. And if people don't show up to vote, we can't have this large majority that we need to basically shove it in their face and win." And I thought that was a bad strategy then. I think it's a bad strategy now. Not to deal with real problems that are right in front of us. But I don't run the DNC. I'm very grateful that Tom Perez was willing to come on the program and at least tell us what's going on and where the party's at. So Dan, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. David in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey David, what's up?
Hey Tom, I have a question for you regarding the 12th Amendment.
Yeah.
If Trump invokes the 12th Amendment, does the new Congress get seated regardless? My question being, if they do get seated, let's say the Democrats maintain the House and take the Senate, and Trump invokes the 12th Amendment, maintains power, can the new Congress turn around and impeach him a second time in his new term, or in his second term?
They could. The 12th Amendment only applies to the presidential race and only applies to the Electoral College, so it won't have anything to do with House and Senate races, although you may have senators, particularly from red states. I mean, there's a bunch of red states that are in play right now where, you may well see a Democrat, from Kentucky replacing Mitch McConnell. You may see, Amy McGrath. You may see, I'm forgetting her name, Linda, whatever, the woman who's running against Susan Collins in Maine. You may, so there's a bunch of states and Texas. I mean, John Cornyn is being given a run for his money. So you may see red states that are controlled by Republicans who refuse to certify the vote, and therefore they can't seat their senators, too, for a while, until it all gets sorted out and worked out, which might be February or March, which gives Donald Trump enough time to steal the election. Again, all of this stuff, David, is in the realm of, wild conspiracy theory, right? I mean, let me just say that right up front. On the one hand, the wise elders of the Democratic Party consider this stuff to be things that are so remote, such remote possibilities. Our lawyers know about it. We'll do something if it happens, but it's probably not going to happen. Although, again, like I said, that's the same thing that they were saying back in 2005, 2006 about, throwing people off the voting rolls and rigging machines. And again, I'm if they want to call me a conspiracy theorist, so be it. But in the election of 1876, that's exactly what happened. In that election,
gotcha.
The guy who lost ended up president. Rutherford B. Hayes lost the popular vote, lost the Electoral College vote, and served as president for 4 years, in the White House. So I don't want to rag on Tom Perez because he's a good guy and he's doing a hell of a job with really, really bad resources and whatnot. But David, thank you for the call. From David to David in Torrance, California. Hey, David. Oh, David, I'm sorry. I'm going to hit a break right now. Let me put you on hold here, and we'll pick you up in the next hour. It's the top. I thought I had another minute. I'm sorry. It's the top of the hour. We'll be back with more of our conversation, and we're going to check in with John Perkins. The guy who wrote the story about the corporate hitmen. He's got a new book out. Check this out. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in some, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you on the line. This is John Perkins. He's got a new book out called Touching the Jaguar, which is, well, I'll let him describe it. He's also the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman and a sequel to it. JohnPerkins.org is his website. JPerkinsAuthor is his Twitter handle. And TouchingTheJaguarBook.com is the website for his new book, Touching the Jaguar. John, welcome back to the program. I'm curious your thoughts on to what extent the economic hitman phenomena is alive and well. You were writing about it, basically projecting American corporate power around the world. To what extent might that be being turned on us right now, the way that German industry, for example, aggressively supported Adolf Hitler in the early 1930s?
It's big, Tom. Thanks, for asking that question. I think that in Touching the Jaguar, I talk a lot about how perception molds reality. And we're in that stage right now where is you just mentioned in your last show that we're really at the stage where it's a fight to change the perception of voters. And the Republican Party, Trump especially, have launched a huge campaign to create a perception that we have to fear immigrants, we have to fear all this, we have to fear all that, we have to fear foreigners, we have to fear brown people, black people, Muslim people, this incredible fear, and at the same time the impression that the Trump administration is doing such an incredibly good job at keeping down the virus, this pandemic, which is, both of those are obviously, they're blatant attempts to mold a reality that will get President Trump reelected, despite all the facts behind it. And our reality is shaped by our perceptions, and that's a very important concept to be aware of.
We're talking with John Perkins. He's the author of 10 books, his latest, Touching the Jaguar. He's also the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John, it seems like a decade or more since I read your book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, but you talked about how you were one of the guys, or at least part of the team, that would go into foreign countries and basically take down politicians who weren't willing to dance to the corporate tune in that particular country under those particular circumstances. Do you see that same process? To what extent is our political systems being molded by economic hitmen within the United States? To what extent? Let me give you a little background on this question. I had a caller in the last hour who lives in Portland, just down the road from where the protests are happening, who was talking about, this young woman who was beaten to the ground by 5 police. She was screaming, "I can't breathe," ultimately muffled, and people were trying to help her. None of that. Some of the just mind-boggling violence never makes its way into the news here in Portland or anywhere else. It shows up on Twitter or something, but that's about it. And I related the story that back in the late 1960s, actually, it was like maybe it might have been 1970, 71, whatever, way back in the day. When I was a teenager, I worked at a radio station. I was doing news for WITL in Lansing, Michigan. And a state police officer and a guy from the Internal Revenue Service came by, flashed a badge at me, and there was another federal guy. I think he might have been FBI. But they came by, flashed a badge, and to me and Bob Brakeman, the news director, and basically said, "We're going to execute an arrest down the road here at this group of tax protesters, but we don't want you guys to cover it because we don't want this whole idea that people shouldn't pay taxes to spread. We don't want to give them any credibility. We don't want them to become martyrs." And we had a big debate after they left about whether we should cover that or not. Ultimately, we didn't have a reporter there. We didn't have any of the details, and we had a threat. And I'm wondering to what extent that kind of thing is going on, or is it more subtle? Is it that, big news organizations don't want to be accused of, fomenting riots or something? Or is it that they're worried that their advertisers, the companies that you talked about in Confessions of an Economic Hitman, were creating realities like you talk about in Touching the Jaguar that made protest really, really difficult? What are your thoughts on that? What does your experience tell you might be going on or is going on?
I think to a certain degree, Tom, it's all of that. And the mainstream media, what we call the mainstream media, is so controlled by its advertisers. First of all, a lot of the media is owned by the big corporations. And if they're not outright owned by the corporations, then they're totally dependent on these big corporations to provide them with advertising to fund them, essentially. And so they're not going to report on anything that the big corporations don't want them to report on. Basically, big corporations don't like to show violence in a way that makes it look like that it's legitimate violence against the system. And they don't want to show protests that seem to be legitimate against the system because the big corporations are the system. We truly are an oligarchy. You write about this in your books, how we've really created this modern form of tyranny, a modern oligarchy, and the oligarchy has the control over the mainstream media. Thank goodness for programs like this one, which are increasingly becoming mainstream. But again, it's about creating this perception. And I have to tell you, one of my fears right now is that it seems as though the military is beginning to stand up to the Trump administration, but the police force is not. And I'm concerned that this business of sending federal troops into Portland and now other places is an attempt by the administration to put the police that's outside the control of the military in a stronger position than the military even, perhaps leading up to some sort of a denial of the results of the election. I mean, this is a wild theory, but it's a possibility that why are we seeing these federal troops going in to situations where there's no need for federal troops, and most city administrations object to it? I think that's a very dangerous and a very scary situation. It's creating an impression, of course, that the president wants to create of a strong anti-crime stance on his part. But it's not anti-crime at all. It's anti the people, and that's very, very frightening to me.
Yeah, it concerns me tremendously, too. And I mean, we used to talk about creeping fascism. It's in our face right now, and it looks increasingly like these are Customs and Border Patrol SWAT teams. Trump has been nurturing for 3 years now, CBP. He's got Chad Wolf now at the head of Homeland Security, who's, a rabid right-winger. And the politicization of what should be essentially a police force. I mean, Customs and Border Patrol is there to police the border, and now they're here in Portland. One of them accused of essentially raping a young woman the night before last here in Portland. And there's no accountability. We have no way of knowing who this guy is. He had no badge. He had no name. He never identified himself. But he was reaching up under her skirt and grabbing her, and I mean, this is crazy, John. This
it's outrageous.
Is crazy.
It's outrageous.
So,
and sorry, go ahead. Well, also my fear is that so local police, regardless of what their real philosophy is, they've been hammered pretty hard. The good guys are like wondering why the heck they're still police officers, probably, except they're working for their pensions, and they're being badmouthed for good reason. They've done some horrible things, police. We've all seen it on television. Trump has come out and defended them. The feds are coming in and doing things that are very strong-armed, and I've got to have a suspicion that a lot of these local police officers are saying, well, thank goodness that the Trump administration is defending it, so we're going to defend the Trump administration. And that's very scary.
I know. Mike Pence is doing a Cops for Trump event later this week. Exactly. John Perkins, author of his latest book, Touching the Jaguar. Check it out. You'll love it. The website, touchingthejaguarbook.com. And, of course, johnperkins.org. John, thanks a lot for dropping by.
My pleasure, Tom. Keep up the great work.
Thanks. You too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour, back with more of the news of the day and your calls. White supremacists posing as Black Lives Matter protesters, instigating riots. It's mind-boggling. And welcome back. Oh, my. Let's see here. Lynn in El Segundo, California. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind today?
The 12th Amendment, I'm concerned about being absolutely clear and accurate in the event that it did kick in. But first of all, it won't kick in if Biden gets 270 electoral votes from enough states who do certify their election. So if Texas, Florida, Wisconsin don't certify, but if other states vote for Biden, we don't have to worry about it. But if we do have to worry about it, I'm reading a copy of the 12th Amendment, and it says the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president, and the vote shall be taken by the states, the representation from each state having one vote. Now, that's where it gets, I disagree with your analysis, and because of specialists I've heard in other shows and other areas. And I agree with your numbers. There are 30 states that have House, like assemblies and senates in their state legislatures that are Republican, and 20 states have majority Democrat. So if it were to go to within the state bodies, then I agree. But I disagree. I think it's going to the House delegations, and I'm a geek.
In 2 years after, go back and check this. In 1878, 2 years after the election of 1876, Congress passed a law to clarify the 12th Amendment. And that law, and I forget the name of the law, was something like, the something or other Voting Act of 1877 or 78. And that law explicitly and specifically says that the congressional delegation shall vote as the majority of the combined members of that state's legislature dictate. It's law. It's been law since the 1870s.
Okay, then former Democratic Senator Tim Wirth. What's that?
You can't just read the 12th Amendment. You have to read it in the context of the law that was passed after it that clarifies it. Again, if you search 12th Amendment and my name, you will find a long article with lots and lots of links to the specific law, to the specific language, to the debates around it, to what happened in that election. At the time, actually, the House of Representatives, at the time, your definition is correct as of 1876. And the House changed their vote to vote for Rutherford Hayes, not because the majority of states were controlled by Republicans, although I believe they might have been, but because Rutherford Hayes, being a Republican, said he would end Reconstruction. He would withdraw Union troops from the South. And that was enough to get the Democrats to go along with him and throw Tilden over the edge of the boat. And that's why Congress got together and said, okay, we need a law to clarify this. It's not just up to the state delegation, up to the delegations. It's up to the individual legislative bodies in the states. So, it's very straightforward stuff, Lynn. You can look it up. Thanks very much for the call. I'm in just a minute, I'm going to get into this amazing story. This, we've been suspecting this for a long time. Here it is. White supremacists marching under the banner of Black Lives Matter. We'll be right back. Stick around. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So back in 2016, the election year, Donald Trump was not yet president. He was just running a scam university, Trump University. That year, and Barack Obama was president, that year, Corinthian Colleges and ITT Technical Institute, two scam for-profit colleges, went out of business and ended up leaving thousands, maybe tens of thousands of students just basically screwed. No degree, no job, and massive amounts of student debt. So President Obama and the Secretary of Education put together this plan. It's called the Borrower Defense Rule, that said that if somebody got ripped off by one of these for-profit colleges, they didn't have to pay back the debt. If it was student debt that was issued by the federal government, we would just eat it as a country. They were the victims of fraud. Well, it turns out Betsy DeVos had other ideas. She came into office, of course, just months afterwards as Donald Trump was sworn into office, and she's been fighting it all the way. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com and our new video for supporters of our program. And welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. So here we go. This is, I am not quoting protesters in this story I'm about to tell you. I'm not quoting left-wing media sources. I'm not quoting some guy who was on the street who saw something and said something. I am quoting the chief of police of Richmond, Virginia, and the mayor of Richmond, Virginia. There was a Black Lives Matter protest that turned violent over the weekend. The police had to step in. This was not one of Trump's, hey, let's bring the Border Patrol in to beat up people. This was the local police department. And they arrested 6 people. But let me just share with you what the mayor and the chief of police said. This is LeVar Stoney, who is the mayor of Richmond. He said, and I quote, "There were white supremacists marching under the banner of Black Lives Matter, an attempt to undermine an otherwise overwhelmingly peaceful movement towards social justice. We've spoken on many occasions about those who've chosen a more violent route to express their discontent and what that does for the overall movement towards social justice. That was the mayor. This is the chief of police. We have identified some individuals, quote, we have identified some individuals who have been seen with the Boogaloo Boys and some Antifa groups around the area, said Richmond Police Chief Gerald Smith on Sunday. The majority of those individuals who were there last night were Caucasian. This was not a Black Lives Matter protest. It was billed as one. The Boogaloo Boys were saying it was one. Trump and this whole right-wing neo-Nazi movement that has erupted all across the United States, springing out of all the years of fear and hate that the NRA has sown, that the John Birch Society has sown, that right-wing extremists have sown, that the Tea Party organizers, Freedom Works, and some of these other right-wing groups scaring people, oh, Democrats are going to have death panels and they're going to kill you, with Obamacare, et cetera, et cetera. They have sown this fear, and all of that fear has animated white men across the United States, and in many cases, presumably unemployed now white men who are doubly pissed off because they've lost their jobs, to say, oh my God, and they're reading this stuff on Facebook. Facebook is the main cesspool where this thing is being amplified and echoing, with the blessing of Facebook's most senior management and some of its right-wingers. They pull down some of the more visible stuff, but it's all over Facebook. And they have been successfully manipulated, these fearful white men, into believing that somehow America will cease to exist as a country if Democrats come into power, if Donald Trump doesn't remain in the White House. This is the Donald Trump who is making his junk in China and selling it using his campaign, who's transferring millions and millions of dollars out of his campaign into his own pocket. This is this grifter who is, he said over the weekend that his main focus has to be on refurbishing the FBI building. Why is that? Well, the FBI wants to move their headquarters to Virginia, where the NSA is and where everybody else is. But Trump doesn't want them to leave that building because then Marriott could build a hotel right across the street from his hotel because, it's a block down, but basically right across the street from the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., which is a violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution to begin with. This grifter using raw, naked racism, appeals to racism, and he's been doing this since 2015 when he first announced he was running for president. Hell, he's been doing this since the 1980s or 90s when he went after the Central Park Five. This grifter has succeeded in convincing these white men that they have to get out there with guns in order to defend what? White supremacy? Some of them, certainly that's definitely the case. There's a story on, I believe it's a Raw story, it might be Daily Kos, about a guy in one particular very, very right-wing town who stood at a street corner with a Black Lives Matter protest, or a sign rather, and simply recorded the people driving by, yelling the N-word at him, yelling all kinds of stuff at him, basically verbally abusing him, yay, white power, that kind of stuff, all going on. So there's that. There's economic insecurity that Trump is playing on. Now there's, fear of the virus that Trump is playing on. And he's got this whole right-wing echo chamber behind him promoting this. And Fox News every night, oh my God, Portland is on fire. The city is in flames. It's chaos. There are terrorists. It's Antifa, the anti-fascist terrorists. There has the headline over at The Guardian, anti-fascists linked to 0 murders in the U.S. in 25 years. But right-wing hate groups, lots and lots of murders. Gee, Why would Trump not know that?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Obviously, he does know that. He's just choosing to tell us that, the sky is green and, the sun doesn't come up.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskensen Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of 2 very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Well, it looks like the Republicans in the U.S. Senate have come to some sort of an agreement. This is not an official announcement. It's just basically been leaked that the Senate Republicans have decided that, as they were saying on TV all weekend, unemployed people are getting too much money. And so they're going to slash unemployment benefits by $1,600 a month. Not to $1,600, but by $1,600. They're going to take away $1,600 a month. They're saying that $600 a week is too much money for average and working Americans, and so they're going to cut it to $200 a week. And those states that have an unemployment system that's running on non-antiquated computer systems must simply give people 70% of their previous salary. But lacking that, if your state doesn't have the ability to do that, instead of $600 a week, you get $200 a week. It will, presumably, this is a $400 a week reduction, $1,600 a month reduction in unemployment benefits. And what's that going to do to the economy? It's going to kill the economy. I mean, to the extent that economies they run on what's called aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is also known as wages or income or the wealth of average people. And when working people, 25 million people out of work, when working people can't earn enough money to buy things, they don't buy things. And what the HEROES Act is the new one. What was the CARES Act was the first piece of legislation that Nancy Pelosi put together with the $600 a week for people that expired last week. What that legislation did was basically prop up the economy because people are getting money and then they're spending it. Now, this is also one of the reasons why Amazon's stock is through the roof. They're spending enormous amounts of it online, and Amazon has the biggest share of that online business. They're inhaling industries. Amazon with their pill pack thing is wiping out small local pharmacies. It just goes on and on and on. But they did this to bookstore owners a long time ago, and which is kind of a whole separate issue. The whole issue of monopoly. In fact, I've got a book coming out about that in a few weeks. But The larger point is that people aren't even going to be able to buy stuff on Amazon if they have no income. And what's that going to do to the economy? Well, I think we can frankly predict that. Anyhow, Wynn in Solon, Maine. Hey, Wynn, what's up?
Well, first of all, thank you for being there. And will you promise us you won't go on vacation until after the election? We need you there.
I make no promises, but I have no plans on taking a vacation. Where am I going to go?
There will be a big protest if you do. So, Anyway.
So what's up, Wynn?
Here's my question. It's really bothering me about this 12th Amendment deal. I've been trying to figure out something how to stop that stuff. But my question is now, if a state chooses to decertify, or whoever does it, the results of the election, how does that affect everything else that is on that election tablet there? The mayors, the state senators, the senators and representatives that go. I mean, don't they have to also throw all that out too? Isn't that really going to throw their state into chaos?
Well, this is, the Republican mayor in Bayer, Texas, that I was talking about earlier. Not mayor, head of the Republican Party, who just lost this primary. That's basically what she's doing. Is she's just saying put the whole thing on hold, or maybe put it on hold for the next term. God only knows. Wynn, it's a really great question, and I honestly don't know the answer. When I did the deep dive to write that op-ed 3 or 4 months ago about the 12th Amendment and the election of 1876, I did not do a deep dive into the 4 states that didn't certify the election, into how that played out, what happened to their federal positions, their House and Senate positions, what happened with their local elections. And so I don't know the answer off the top of my head, Wynn. I'm sorry.
Yeah, geez, if you can figure that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I need to do a little more research myself. I keep saying I'm going to write another op-ed about this. And by the way, you can find all the op-eds I've written, including the one I'm talking about here, over at HartmannReport.com. It's all right there. I'm going to have to get back to it. Wynn, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. And I just wanted to add to your list of questionable, or should we say, Trump schemes that's going on, especially with this so-called federal police. Just because they're in some kind of combat uniform with a patch saying police on their chest doesn't mean dilly squat to me that they're actual federal officials. Because we all know that in case history, we've had criminals and terrorists impersonate law enforcement to entrap and manipulate their victims, targets, hostages, you name it. And then given that,
but they're not. The people coming out of the federal building in Washington, D.C. are not pretending to be federal officers. That's not the problem. The problem is that they're concealing their identity. And one of them, groped this woman, grabbed her breast and put his hand up underneath her skirt and groped her while she was in custody. This 37-year-old mother of a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old? Really? And we don't know who he is? So he can't be held accountable? When people can't be held accountable, their behavior changes. You can see this with Twitter, for example, where people can be anonymous. It's not a good or healthy thing. Bob in Jefferson City, Missouri. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, I'm sorry for the delay. I would have loved to have presented this suggestion to Tom.
I am Tom. You're on the air, Bob.
I'm sorry to Thom Perez.
Okay. Sorry.
He was on because I think you raised some really interesting points. This is a demographic that I think we could really utilize in this situation, which is actually the Trump followers. There's a lot of stuff in Joe's records that would really appeal to the Trump followers, and they're not taking advantage of it. Like the Iraq War, which basically all the Trump people think is a great thing. So did Joe, and also the lies about Joe being a socialist, that should be straightened out. Joe doesn't believe in anything.
Yeah, I'm not going to go down that road. Thank you for the call. Deborah in Denver. Hey, Deborah, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I'm watching on YouTube.
Thank you.
My husband and I, we were just finishing, we just finished watching Gandhi. And Gandhi studied Jesus, and he led his people to protest peacefully. And I think that the protesters should, I mean, this is just my opinion, but I think that they should protest by sitting down and singing Amazing Grace and Hallelujah. And they're peacefully protesting, because then there's no doubt and no question that there's something else going on. And anybody else that's standing up and trying to cause trouble, then they obviously know that that's not part of the peaceful protest movement. So that's all I have to say.
I don't disagree with you, Deborah, but this is not a movement that has a centralized leadership. It's not a movement that has anybody who can say, here's how we're going to do it. And there are all kinds of competing factions, both on the left and on the right, who are inserting themselves into this. It's very troubling. But your point is well taken, and thank you for calling and making it. Bob in Fresno. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Tom, thank you for taking my call, and I really appreciate what you're doing. I had a couple of questions, points to make. In terms of our current protests, you see the climate crisis, BLM, the economic disparity, state violence. How can we create a broader movement to join all these movements together? And given that the police are so aggressive and violent, can we look at other tactics and take a break from the police? Because I've been in so many demos where you get provoked, and I know how it happens. Yeah. And people get angry, and they do throw stuff back, and it's it plays into their hands. I do admire the people in the streets. I've done it myself. But can't we look at consumer boycotts, targeted boycotts, strikes, rent strikes, mortgage strikes?
I don't think so. I mean, you've got like Goya, the president of Goya Foods, which is, it makes principally kind of Mexican food, Mexican products. And food types, as in Mexican restaurant kinds of food. He publicly supported Trump, and there are parts of the country now where Goya products are still stacking up on the shelves. There's other parts of the country where people are buying more of it. I mean, Trump put Goya products all over the Resolute desk in the White House, which is a violation of the law. And Ivanka got pictured with a can of Goya. So, whatever kind of economic boycott you try to do, their response is going to be to promote that company and those products. All of this only serves one purpose, and that's to tear America apart. Donald Trump has made the calculation that if he can destroy this country, if he can tear us apart, if he can make us hate each other and fear each other, then he can prevail, he can stay in office, and he can avoid going to jail next year. That's the bottom line. I believe that's the bottom line from this point of view. And he can continue making millions of dollars a year off being president. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back with your calls. And welcome back. Dave in Lombard, Illinois, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I'm calling to suggest that the postal workers try something like work overtime off the clock starting in early October to make sure all the mail gets delivered. I know that's probably illegal, but everything Trump does is illegal.
It's not going to happen, Dave.
But if they don't do it, they're not going to get... They're going to lose their jobs.
Or they're going to end up working for FedEx instead of the USPS, I mean, Trump wants to privatize the post office. Increasingly, Dave, I am of the opinion that Donald Trump is dancing to the tune of a whole group of foreign oligarchs who hate democracy, who fear democracy, frankly. And, whether it's protesters being beaten in the streets in eastern Russia right now, or whether it's protesters in Saudi Arabia having their heads chopped off, literally, or whether it's protesters in the Philippines being shot, or whether it's protesters in Brazil being beat up by right-wing paramilitaries and death squads, it's all the same thing. they're all basically using the same strategy, which is destroy democracy in the country so that the billionaire autocrats, the kleptocrats, the thieves, can basically take over and run the country. And, that's what I'm seeing. And it's out of control.
I think they have nothing to lose. If they get fired, they get fired.
Postal
they're going to lose their job anyhow if Biden's not elected.
Well, you mean you're talking about going to work?
Going to work, yeah. Work overtime off the clock. After their 8-hour shift, work a couple extra hours, make sure that all the mail gets delivered.
Yeah. The management
it's sitting in their warehouses.
I'm telling you, management will not allow that. It's
management's going to lose their jobs too.
I get that, but I just, I don't see any way that this thing plays itself out. Dave, thank you for the call. I mean, I understand your sentiment, and hey, good people of good intention can rise up and do the right thing, but and postal workers, by and large, right now have to feel like, the most whiplashed group in America. I mean, they just have to have like, whoa, what happened to us? Right? I mean, they're being trashed at every turn. You've got Donald Trump going against them. You've had the Koch brothers going after them for 40 years. You've got UPS and FedEx spending millions and millions of dollars to get Republicans and conservative Democrats elected who will work to privatize the post office and hand it off to these for-profit delivery companies. When you think about it, I mean, just consider how breathtaking this is. We have an institution that is defined in the Constitution. It's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that authorizes Congress to appropriate money to pay for the post office and postal roads. And Ben Franklin, our first Postmaster General, and the Republicans are saying, and libertarians and conservatives have been saying for some time, no, that needs to be handed off to FedEx, a non-unionized company. Post office is the largest unionized employer in the United States. We got to take them down. Mind-boggling. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com. And the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line, and how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Susan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Well, on Saturday morning at 1 o'clock in the morning, our Democratic headquarters in Phoenix was firebombed, and it was totally destroyed. Right. It's been there for over 20 years, and to me, it's like an act of war. But I haven't heard anything about it nationally.
Yeah, I saw a small story in the New York Times on Saturday about that, and I haven't seen any other mention so far. So far, what I heard yesterday was that that they have no idea they've not been able to find who did this. Is that still the case?
Yes, it is. We still don't know who did it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It is like an act of war. I agree with you, Susan. That's terrible. Thank you for the call. Jen in Houston, Texas. Hey, Jen, what's up?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. So I have COVID right now. I got it last week, and I'm still recovering. I'm really pretty upset. I work in a nursing home, and I knew when Abbott was saying that he was going to reopen the economy, I knew it wasn't going to be good. But what can I do as an ordinary citizen that's been affected by this? Now, what can I do to wake this idiot up? Because it is cause and effect. Literally, you cannot reopen an economy when there's 10,000 cases a day. And I'm one of the victims too. And I really want my voice to be heard. What can I do as an ordinary citizen so that people will not die needlessly? Because I had patients that died literally, and it's so heart-wrenching. And I'm glad I survived, but I'm still recovering right now. I still have shortness of breath and stuff.
All right. Jen, the three things that I was talking about earlier, number one, make sure that you're registered to vote and apply for a vote by mail, ballot. And if you don't get it, raise hell. Number two, wake up as many people as you possibly can to what's going on using social media, using your email list, whatever. However, you can reach out to friends, family, neighbors. And number three, if possible, and I wouldn't recommend this to you because you have COVID, but if possible, show up at a demonstration. The history of the world tells us that large popular movements can slow down or even stop or reverse moves toward fascism in countries, and that's what we need to do here. If there's a fourth or fifth strategy, it doesn't come to my mind immediately. Maybe somebody will call in and say, "Oh, you should add this to that list." I would love to, but that's what comes to my mind. Jen, does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Yes, it does. Thank you.
You can also call your members of Congress. The phone number for Congress is 202-224-3121. Even call your Republican members and just tell them, I don't consent. This is being done in my name, and I'm not in agreement with this. And for that matter, you can contact your governor, Greg Abbott's. He's got offices around the state, and of course, he's got an office in the Capitol in Austin. You can reach out to them and let them know what you think. Jen, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. I wish you the very, very best, and keep us up to date on how you're doing recovering. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate
Thanks, Jen. Thank you, Mike in San Francisco. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Hey, listen, I had a million things to say. I'll keep it quick. I know we're low on time, and one point that I'd like to make, because I'm out there demonstrating every day in Oakland, but I think the only way, and income inequality is a huge problem. You were talking about thievery and all that. I know, because I pay $800 a week in taxes. Anyway, listen, until these protests go from the streets of Portland and the streets of Oakland to the gated communities where these rich people live, okay, until we start showing up there, I don't think we're going to have an impact, because they don't see homeless people. They don't see it when they go home to their nice fancy houses. I say we show up in those gated communities and start a little people protest.
Mike, I get what you're saying, and the reality and economics of it all arguably support what you're saying. But look at what happened in Missouri. When a group of protesters were trying to march through, or did march through, a gated community to get to the home of I don't recall if it was the mayor or the governor or whoever it was, but they were trying to bring a protest to this person's home, and you had that couple who who owned this McMansion, and they walked out with, he had an assault rifle, she had a pistol. The local police arrested them for pointing guns at peaceful unarmed protesters, which is assault. It's against the law. But now the governor is saying he's going to issue a pardon if they get prosecuted, they'll just, it's just another thing that they'll politicize.
We can't let that intimidate us, Tom. Listen, I'll tell you what, guns don't scare me. I'm from Oakland. Okay, I'll tell you what, we show up 100,000 strong and they won't be able to do nothing.
Yeah, Mike, thank you. An excellent punctuation mark for the day's program. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to actively engage democracy, or it ceases to be democracy. We've got to save this republic from these fascist crazies. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Tell your friends how to find good progressive media as well. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and those around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!